The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the small interrogation room at Camp Pendleton, casting harsh shadows across the metal table where Sarah Chin sat with her hands cuffed behind her back. The military police officers had been polite but firm when they arrested her outside the Veterans Hospital, where she had been visiting wounded service members as she did every Tuesday for the past 3 years. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to explain why you've been telling people you served as a Navy SEAL," Staff Sergeant Martinez said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots from social media posts, witness statements, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of Sarah at various military events. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "I never claimed to be a SEAL to anyone who mattered. I help veterans because I understand their struggles. That's all I've ever tried to do." The second officer, a stern-faced woman with captain's bars, leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, we have multiple witnesses who say you've been representing yourself as former Special Operations. That's stolen valor, and it's a federal crime. We take this very seriously." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, remembering how this all started. 6 months ago, she had been volunteering at a homeless shelter when a young veteran named Marcus had approached her. He was struggling with PTSD, living on the streets, and had lost faith in getting help from the VA. When he saw the small trident tattoo on her wrist during their conversation, he had assumed she was former military. Sarah had tried to explain, but Marcus had been so desperate for someone who understood that she had simply listened instead of correcting him. Word spread quickly among the veteran community. Sarah's genuine care and understanding of military culture made other veterans seek her out. She knew the lingo, understood the hierarchy, and seemed to grasp the unique challenges they faced in ways that civilian counselors often couldn't. What started as a misunderstanding snowballed into something much larger. "I need to make a phone call," Sarah said quietly, looking up at the officers. "There are people who need to know where I am." Captain Williams shook her head. "You'll get your phone call after we finish processing you. Right now, we need answers. How long have you been running this con? Are you collecting money from these veterans? Disability benefits you're not entitled to?" "I've never taken a penny from anyone," Sarah's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. "I pay for everything out of my own pocket. The meals, the gas money to drive veterans to appointments, the emergency hotel rooms when someone needs a safe place to sleep. I work 2 jobs to afford it." Staff Sergeant Martinez consulted his notes. "According to our investigation, you've been present at over 30 military events in the past year. Memorial services, change of command ceremonies, unit reunions. You've been wearing military-style clothing and accepting recognition meant for actual service members." Sarah bit her lip, remembering each of those events. They hadn't started as deceptions. The first memorial service she attended was for Danny Rodriguez, a young Marine she had been helping get treatment for his traumatic brain injury. His family had invited her, grateful for the support she had provided during Danny's final months. When other attendees saw her there and assumed she was military, she had simply not corrected them. "Danny Rodriguez," she said softly. "Did you include his family in your witness statements? Did you ask them why they wanted me there?" The 2 officers exchanged glances. Captain Williams made a note on her pad. "We're not here to discuss individual cases. We're here because your actions have caused confusion and potentially undermined the integrity of military institutions." Sarah understood their position, but frustration bubbled up inside her. For 3 years, she had watched veterans struggle with a system that often failed them. She had held hands with dying soldiers, driven suicidal veterans to emergency rooms in the middle of the night, and helped homeless former service members find temporary housing. The fact that some people assumed she was military herself had never seemed important compared to the actual help she was providing. "There's something you need to know about that tattoo," Sarah began, but Staff Sergeant Martinez cut her off. "Ma'am, we've seen fake military tattoos before. Getting inked doesn't make you a veteran." Sarah's jaw tightened. The trident on her wrist wasn't fake, and it wasn't stolen valor. But explaining its true meaning would require sharing parts of her story that she had kept private for over a decade. Parts that still woke her up in cold sweats some nights. "I want to cooperate," she said carefully. "But I need to speak with someone who has the authority to understand the full situation. Someone with high enough clearance." Captain Williams laughed without humor. "Clearance? Ms. Chen, this isn't a spy movie. You're facing charges for impersonating military personnel. The only authority you need to worry about is the federal prosecutor who's going to be handling your case. The door to the interrogation room opened, and a young private stepped inside, handing a note to Staff Sergeant Martinez. He read it quickly, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Ma'am, there's been a development. Admiral Thompson is here and wants to speak with you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew that name, though she hadn't heard it spoken aloud in many years. Admiral Rebecca Thompson had been Commander Thompson the last time they had met, in a very different context under very different circumstances. Captain Williams looked confused. Why would an admiral want to speak with a civilian facing stolen valor charges? "I don't know, ma'am," the private replied. "But she specifically asked for Miss Chen by name and said it was urgent." Sarah's mind raced. Admiral Thompson's presence changed everything. It meant someone had dug deeper into her background than the surface-level investigation that had led to her arrest. It meant they had found the classified files that explained not just the tattoo, but why she understood military culture so intimately despite never wearing the uniform herself. "I'll see her," Sarah said quietly. "But I want these cuffs removed first." "Admiral Thompson will understand why." Staff Sergeant Martinez hesitated, looking to his superior officer. Captain Williams studied Sarah's face carefully, perhaps seeing something in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Remove the restraints," she ordered. "But you're still under arrest, Ms. Chen. Don't forget that." As the metal cuffs clicked open, Sarah rubbed her wrists and felt the small trident tattoo with her thumb. The black ink had faded slightly over the years, but she could still feel the raised edges where the needle had gone deeper than usual. The tattoo artist had been nervous that day, working in a secure facility under unusual circumstances. "Before Admiral Thompson comes in," Sarah said, looking directly at Captain Williams, "I need you to understand something. I never wanted any recognition. I never wanted to be seen as a hero or thanked for my service. I just wanted to help people who reminded me of someone very important to me." "Who?" Staff Sergeant Martinez asked, his curiosity getting the better of his professional demeanor. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "My brother. Lieutenant Commander James Chen, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He was killed in action in Afghanistan 12 years ago during a classified operation that officially never happened." The room fell silent except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah could see the two officers processing this information, trying to reconcile it with what they thought they knew about her case. "Ma'am," Captain Williams said more gently, "if that's true, it still doesn't justify impersonating military personnel." "I'm not impersonating anyone," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. "I'm honoring someone. And when Admiral Thompson gets here, she's going to explain to you exactly what this tattoo means and why I have every right to wear it." The door opened again, and Sarah turned to see a tall woman in navy dress blues step into the room. Admiral Thompson's silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her chest displayed rows of ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career. But it was her eyes that Sarah recognized, the same sharp intelligence and quiet compassion that had helped her through the darkest period of her life. "Sarah Chen," Admiral Thompson said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "It's been a long time." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, standing automatically despite the handcuffs that had been removed. "It has." Admiral Thompson's gaze moved to the two military police officers, who had also come to attention. "Captain Williams, Staff Sergeant Martinez, I need you to step outside for a moment. What I'm about to discuss with Ms. Chen is classified at a level above your current clearance." "Ma'am, she's under arrest for stolen valor," Captain Williams protested. "We can't just, Captain," Admiral Thompson's voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ms. Chen is not guilty of stolen valor. She has never claimed to be something she isn't. Now, please step outside and wait for my instructions." As the two officers reluctantly left the room, Admiral Thompson moved closer to Sarah, her expression softening slightly. "Show me your wrist," she said quietly. Sarah extended her left arm, pulling back her sleeve to reveal the small trident tattoo. Admiral Thompson examined it carefully, noting details that the military police had missed, the specific style of the trident, the way certain lines had been deliberately modified, and the small numbers etched almost invisibly into the design. "Operation Neptune's Spear," Admiral Thompson said, not as a question but as a statement of recognition. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah confirmed. "Assignment number 2847. Psychological Operations Specialist, Civilian Contractor, Special Clearance Level Tango 7.
Admiral Thompson nodded slowly. Your brother's final operation. You were part of the mission support team. Sarah's composure finally cracked slightly, her voice becoming thick with emotion. He asked me to be there.
Said if anything happened to him, he wanted family close by. I was the only family he had left. The small interrogation room suddenly felt heavy with the weight of memories and classified operations that most people would never know existed. Sarah remembered the cold mountain air in Afghanistan, the constant tension of being in a forward operating base, and the moment when her brother's team had failed to return from their mission. That tattoo, Admiral Thompson continued, was authorized by Naval Special Warfare Command as recognition for civilian personnel who provided critical support during classified operations. It's not stolen valor, Captain Williams, she said, raising her voice slightly so the officers outside could hear through the door. It's earned valor. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the day she had received the tattoo. It was 3 days after James's memorial service, in a sterile room at a secure facility in Virginia. A rear admiral she had never met before or since had explained that while her contributions to the mission could never be publicly acknowledged, the Navy wanted to ensure she understood that her brother's sacrifice and her own service to the mission would not be forgotten. The veterans I help, Sarah said, looking at Admiral Thompson, they remind me of him. The way they carry themselves, the way they talk about their brothers and sisters in arms, the way they struggle with coming home.
I see James in every one of them. Admiral Thompson's expression showed understanding mixed with concern. Sarah, you can't save them all. You can't bring James back by helping every veteran you meet.
I'm not trying to bring him back, Sarah replied firmly. I'm trying to make sure his sacrifice meant something. James died believing that protecting people was worth any cost. The least I can do is honor that by helping the people who shared that belief. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. The investigation into your activities triggered an automatic review because your name is flagged in several classified databases. When Captain Williams's report crossed my desk, I realized what was happening.
How many people know? Sarah asked. About your actual background?
Very few.
About this arrest? Too many.
Admiral Thompson moved to the window, looking out at the base beyond.
Sarah, what you've been doing is admirable, but it's also dangerous.
You've put yourself in a position where people could easily misunderstand your motivations and qualifications. Sarah understood the Admiral's concern, but she also understood something that the military bureaucracy sometimes missed.
Ma'am, with respect, I've helped 37 veterans find stable housing in the past year. I've driven 14 people to suicide prevention appointments. I've held the hand of 6 dying veterans whose families couldn't be there. If that's dangerous, then I accept the risk.
Admiral Thompson turned back to face her. It's dangerous because you're operating without official support or recognition.
You're one person trying to fill gaps in a system that should be providing these services. The system is failing them, Sarah said bluntly. I've watched veterans wait 8 months for mental health appointments.
I've seen homeless former soldiers die on the street while their disability claims are processed.
Someone needs to fill those gaps.
I know, Admiral Thompson admitted. And what you've accomplished is remarkable. But this arrest, even if the charges are dropped, will follow you. It could undermine your ability to help anyone.
Sarah hadn't considered that angle.
If word spread through the veteran community that she had been arrested for stolen valor, it could destroy the trust she had spent 3 years building. Veterans who were already suspicious of outsiders would close ranks against her. What do you recommend? She asked. Admiral Thompson was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing options and implications. There's a new initiative being developed by the Department of Veterans Affairs. A civilian liaison program designed to bridge the gap between military and civilian support services. It would give qualified individuals official recognition and resources to help veterans navigate the system.
You're offering me a job? I'm offering you legitimacy.
Official credentials that would allow you to do what you're already doing, but with institutional support and legal protection.
Sarah considered this carefully.
Official recognition would solve the immediate problem, but it might also constrain her ability to operate flexibly. Government programs came with rules and regulations that could slow down her response to urgent situations.
Would I still be able to help veterans the way I do now? driving them to appointments, helping with emergency housing, being available when they need someone to talk to at 3 in the morning? Within reasonable parameters, yes.
You'd have access to emergency funds for housing assistance, partnerships with mental health providers who specialize in veteran care, and a direct line to VA officials who can expedite claims and appointments. It was more than Sarah had ever hoped for, but she remained cautious.
What about the veterans I'm already helping?
Some of them are undocumented, some have less than honorable discharges, some are involved in activities that aren't entirely legal.
Would I be required to report them? Admiral Thompson smiled slightly. Sarah, the goal is to help veterans, not to create more problems for them.
The program would give you discretion in how you provide assistance, as long as you're not facilitating anything that directly endangers people. Outside the interrogation room, Sarah could hear Captain Williams and Staff Sergeant Martinez discussing the situation in hushed tones. They were clearly confused by Admiral Thompson's intervention and uncertain about how to proceed with the arrest. If I accept this position, Sarah said, what happens to the current charges? They disappear. Officially, this was a case of mistaken identity and insufficient background investigation. Your record would be cleared, and the military police would receive additional training on identifying legitimate civilian liaisons. Sarah looked down at her wrist again, tracing the outline of the trident tattoo with her finger. James would have laughed at the irony of her being arrested for impersonating military personnel when she had actually done more to support active operations than most people with official military credentials. There's something else, Admiral Thompson continued. The program would include access to counseling and support services for civilian personnel who have been exposed to military trauma.
You've been carrying this alone for 12 years, Sarah. You don't have to anymore.
The offer of professional support hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had spent so many years focused on helping others that she had neglected her own healing. The nightmares about James's final mission still came regularly, and she often found herself taking on more veteran cases than she could realistically handle because saying no felt like abandoning them.
I need to think about it, she said finally. Admiral Thompson nodded.
Of course.
But don't think too long.
The veteran community needs people like you, and you need official protection to continue doing this work safely. The Admiral moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. Sarah, your brother would be proud of what you've accomplished. But he would also want you to take care of yourself while you're taking care of others. As Admiral Thompson left the room, Sarah remained standing by the window, looking out at the Marines training in the distance. Their disciplined movements and obvious camaraderie reminded her of the stories James used to tell about his teams. He had always emphasized that the strongest military units were the ones where everyone looked out for everyone else. Maybe it was time for her to let someone else look out for her while she continued looking out for the veterans who needed her help. 3 days after Admiral Thompson's unexpected intervention, Sarah sat in a sterile conference room at the Department of Veterans Affairs regional office in San Diego. The walls were lined with official photographs of military leaders and framed certificates that spoke to the bureaucratic nature of the institution she was being invited to join. Across from her sat Dr. Patricia Reeves, the VA's Director of Veteran Transition Services, and Colonel Michael Torres, a retired Army officer who now served as the Civilian Liaison Program Coordinator. Ms. Chen, your background check came back with some interesting classifications, Dr. Reeves said, shuffling through a thick file. Most of your military-related activities are heavily redacted, which makes this evaluation challenging.
Sarah had expected this.
Her involvement in classified operations meant that most of her qualifications couldn't be discussed openly, even in a secure government facility.
I understand the limitations. Admiral Thompson assured me that the relevant authorities have confirmed my credentials.
Colonel Torres leaned forward, his weathered face showing the kind of skepticism that came from decades of military experience. What I'm concerned about, Ms. Chen, is your methods. We've reviewed some of your activities over the past 3 years, and, while your intentions appear genuine, your approach has been highly irregular.
Irregular how?
Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew where this conversation was heading.
You've been operating outside any oversight or accountability structure, Dr. Reeves explained.
You've provided direct financial assistance to veterans without documentation, transported individuals across state lines without proper authorization, and intervened in situations that could have exposed you and the veterans to legal liability. Sarah remembered Marcus, the young veteran she had first helped 6 months ago. 2 weeks after their initial meeting, he had called her at midnight from a bridge in downtown San Diego, contemplating suicide. She had driven to his location, talked him down, and then spent the night with him in a hotel room to ensure he didn't hurt himself. Technically, she had probably violated numerous regulations and protocols, but Marcus was alive today because she had acted without waiting for official approval. Sometimes people need help more urgently than bureaucracy can provide, Sarah said carefully.
I've never put anyone in danger, and I've never acted beyond my capabilities. Colonel Torres consulted his notes.
According to our investigation, you've provided emergency housing for 37 veterans in the past year. That's an average of more than 3 people per month. Where did you get the resources for that level of assistance?
Sarah had been dreading this question.
Her financial situation was complicated, and explaining it would require revealing personal details she preferred to keep private.
I work 2 jobs and live very modestly. Most of my income goes toward helping veterans.
2 jobs where?
Dr. Reeves pressed.
I work as a night shift security guard at a medical equipment company, and I do freelance translation services for legal documents. My brother left me some money when he died, and I've been using it for emergency assistance. What she didn't mention was that the sum money James had left her was substantial: death benefits, life insurance, and combat pay from multiple deployments that he had barely spent.
James had lived like a monk when he wasn't deployed, saving nearly everything he earned.
Sarah had felt guilty about touching the money for years, but using it to help veterans felt like honoring his memory.
Colonel Torres made a note.
Ms. Chen, under the Civilian Liaison Program, you would have access to official emergency assistance funds, but they come with strict accountability requirements.
Every expenditure would need to be documented and justified. I understand, Sarah replied. But what happens when someone needs help at 2 a.m. and the paperwork can't wait until business hours?
Dr. Reeves and Colonel Torres exchanged glances. This was clearly a recurring challenge in veteran services: the gap between urgent human need and institutional processes. The program includes provisions for emergency interventions, Dr. Reeves said slowly.
But they require post-incident reporting and review.
You couldn't just hand someone cash and hope for the best. Sarah nodded, though she worried about veterans who might be reluctant to accept help that came with official documentation and review processes. Some of the people she helped were undocumented immigrants who had served in the military through special programs, others had complicated legal situations that made them wary of government involvement.
What about veterans who aren't eligible for traditional VA services? She asked. Colonel Torres's expression grew more serious. That's a gray area.
Officially, the program is designed to help eligible veterans navigate existing services. We can't provide assistance to individuals who don't meet VA criteria for support.
So if someone served honorably but received a less than honorable discharge due to PTSD symptoms that weren't properly diagnosed at the time, they're out of luck? Not necessarily, Dr. Reeves interjected.
Part of your role would be helping veterans appeal discharge classifications and apply for upgrades when appropriate.
But that's a legal process that takes time. Time was exactly what Sarah worried about.
She thought about Danny Rodriguez, the young Marine whose memorial service had started her involvement in military events. Danny had died waiting for his disability claim to be processed, living on the streets because a bureaucratic error had delayed his benefits for 8 months. Dr. Reeves, with respect, some veterans don't have time for legal processes. They need immediate help with basic survival, food, shelter, medical care.
If I can provide that assistance while they pursue official channels, isn't that better than letting them fall through the cracks?
Yes, Dr. Reeves agreed, but it creates liability issues for the program and for you personally.
If something goes wrong during one of your unofficial interventions, who's responsible? Sarah hadn't thought much about personal liability over the past 3 years.
She had been focused on immediate needs rather than long-term consequences.
But she understood the institutional concerns. Government programs needed clear procedures and accountability structures.
What if we created a hybrid approach, she suggested. Official assistance for situations that fit program criteria, and a separate channel for emergency interventions that require more flexibility? Colonel Torres looked interested despite his earlier skepticism.
What would that look like? Sarah had been thinking about this since her meeting with Admiral Thompson.
A discretionary fund for true emergencies, administered through a non-profit organization rather than directly through the VA. It would provide a buffer between urgent assistance and official oversight. You're talking about starting a charity, Dr. Reeves observed. I'm talking about formalizing what I'm already doing, but with institutional support and transparency, Sarah clarified. Veterans would have access to both official services and emergency assistance when needed. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door.
A young man in navy dress blues entered and handed Colonel Torres a sealed envelope.
"Excuse me," Colonel Torres said, opening the envelope and reading its contents. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read.
"Ms. Chen, it appears we have additional guidance on your case."
He passed the document to Dr. Reeves, who read it quickly and looked up at Sarah with new interest.
"What is it?" Sarah asked.
"Orders from Naval Special Warfare Command," Dr. Reeves explained. "You're being officially recognized as a civilian specialist in veteran transition services, with special authorization for flexible support operations."
Sarah was stunned.
She hadn't expected military intervention in what she thought was a civilian program discussion. Colonel Torres looked equally surprised. "This gives you broad authority to provide assistance to military personnel and veterans using whatever methods you deem appropriate, subject only to legal and safety constraints."
"I don't understand," Sarah said. "Why would Naval Special Warfare Command get involved in a VA program?"
Dr. Reeves smiled for the first time during the meeting.
"Ms. Chen, it appears that your work has been noticed at very high levels.
This authorization essentially allows you to operate with military backing while working within civilian veteran services."
The implications were significant.
Military authorization would give Sarah credibility with veterans who were suspicious of civilian helpers, while also providing institutional protection for her more unconventional assistance methods.
"There's one condition," Colonel Torres continued, reading further into the document.
"You're required to work with a military mental health specialist to address your own trauma-related stress."
"Apparently, someone believes you've been taking on too much without adequate personal support." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest.
She had avoided dealing with her own emotional issues related to James's death and her involvement in the classified operation that had killed him.
Focusing on other veterans' problems had been a way of avoiding her own. "Who would I work with?" she asked. Dr.
Jennifer Walsh, a Navy psychologist who specializes in family trauma related to special operations casualties, Dr. Reeves explained. "She has the security clearance necessary to discuss your classified experiences." The idea of talking about James's death and its aftermath with someone who would understand the military context was both appealing and terrifying. Sarah had tried civilian therapy twice over the years, but had found it frustrating to discuss her brother's work in vague terms that concealed the true nature of his sacrifice. "When would this start?" she asked.
"Immediately," Colonel Torres replied.
"Your first appointment with Dr. Walsh is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Your official authorization for civilian liaison activities becomes effective after you complete an initial psychological evaluation." Sarah realized that the military was not only supporting her work with veterans, but also ensuring she was mentally capable of continuing it safely. The approach was characteristically thorough and practical.
"What about the veterans I'm already helping? Can I continue supporting them while this evaluation is completed?"
"Yes, Dr. Reeves confirmed, but you'll be paired with a VA caseworker who can provide backup and ensure continuity of care."
"You won't be operating alone anymore."
The prospect of working with institutional support rather than against institutional obstacles was appealing, but Sarah worried about losing the personal connection that made her effective with veterans who had been failed by bureaucratic systems.
"Will I still be able to make direct contact with veterans? Meet them where they are, respond to emergencies personally?" "That's exactly what the program needs," Colonel Torres assured her. "The VA has excellent resources, but we struggle with trust issues.
Veterans often see us as part of the system that failed them initially.
Having someone who can bridge that gap is invaluable."
Sarah thought about the dozens of veterans she had worked with over the past 3 years. Many of them had explicitly told her that they trusted her because she wasn't part of the official military or VA system. They saw her as someone who cared about them personally rather than professionally.
"I need to ask you something honestly," Sarah said, looking at both Dr. Reeves and Colonel Torres. "Is this program designed to control what I'm doing, or to support it?"
Dr. Reeves leaned back in her chair, considering the question carefully. "Ms. Chen, 3 months ago, I would have said control.
The VA doesn't like unregulated assistance because it creates liability and accountability problems. But we've reviewed your results, and, frankly, you've accomplished things that our official programs haven't been able to achieve. Such as housing placement rate of 93% for veterans you've assisted, Colonel Torres read from his file. Mental health intervention success rate of 87%. 0 suicides among veterans under your direct support. Those numbers are significantly better than most official programs. Sarah was surprised that anyone had been tracking her results. She had focused on individual cases rather than statistical outcomes. How do you have those numbers? She asked. We've been quietly monitoring your activities since the Stolen Valor investigation began, Dr. Reeves admitted. What we found was a civilian who understood military culture better than most veterans counselors and who had developed innovative approaches to crisis intervention. So this isn't about stopping what I'm doing? No, Colonel Torres said firmly. This is about giving you the resources and authority to do more of it, while ensuring you have the personal support you need to sustain it long term. Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. For 3 years, she had operated in a constant state of uncertainty, never sure if her next intervention might result in legal trouble or accusations of overstepping her authority. Official recognition would change that dynamic completely. There's one more thing, Dr. Reeves said, pulling out another document. We'd like you to consider developing a training program for other civilian liaisons. Your methods and insights could be valuable for expanding this program nationally. The idea of teaching others to do what she had learned through trial and error was both exciting and daunting. Sarah had never thought of herself as having a replicable method, she had simply responded to needs as she encountered them. I'm not sure I could explain what I do in a way that others could learn, she said honestly. That's why we'd pair you with instructional design specialists, Colonel Torres explained. Your job would be to demonstrate effective techniques and share your understanding of veteran culture. Others would handle the formal curriculum development. Sarah looked out the conference room window at the flag flying over the VA building. 3 days ago, she had been in handcuffs, facing federal charges for impersonating military personnel. Now she was being asked to help design a national program for veteran assistance. The transformation felt surreal, but it also felt right. James had always believed that the best solutions came from people who understood problems personally rather than academically. A program based on her practical experience might actually help veterans in ways that traditional institutional approaches couldn't. I'll do it, she said quietly. All of it. The liaison position, the counseling, the training program development. But, I have one condition. What's that? Dr. Reeves asked. The veterans I'm already working with get priority for any services or resources that become available through this program. I won't abandon people who trusted me when I had no official authority. Colonel Torres smiled. Ms. Chen, that's exactly the kind of thinking that makes this program work. Of course, we'll prioritize continuity of care for your existing clients. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a sense of completion that had been missing since James's death 12 years earlier. She had found a way to honor his sacrifice while building something meaningful from her own pain. The trident tattoo on her wrist no longer felt like a reminder of loss, it felt like a symbol of purpose. 6 weeks into her new role as an official civilian liaison for veteran services, Sarah found herself in the most challenging situation she had faced since the Stolen Valor arrest. She stood outside a rundown motel in East San Diego at 2:30 in the morning, listening to Maria Santos cry through the thin door of room 247. Maria was a former Army medic who had served 3 tours in Iraq before receiving a medical discharge for injuries sustained in an IED explosion. She had been living in her car for 2 months after losing her job due to untreated PTSD symptoms, and Sarah had finally convinced her to accept emergency housing assistance 3 days earlier. Maria, it's Sarah, she called softly through the door. I know you're scared, but you're safe now. Just let me in so we can talk. The crying stopped, but the door remained locked. Sarah could hear Maria moving around inside, probably pacing the small room as she did when anxiety overwhelmed her ability to think clearly. I can't do this anymore, Maria's voice came through the door, thick with exhaustion and despair. I can't pretend to be okay when everything is falling apart. The VA says my disability claim was denied again. They want me to prove my injuries are service-connected, but I can't remember half of what happened over there.
Sarah's heart ached for Maria, who represented dozens of veterans caught in bureaucratic nightmares that turned seeking help into a form of additional trauma. The new civilian liaison program had provided Sarah with official resources and authority, but it hadn't eliminated the fundamental problems with veteran care systems.
Maria, remember what we talked about yesterday? You don't have to prove anything to me. I believe you, and I'm going to help you fight this decision.
Dr. Jennifer Walsh had warned Sarah during their therapy sessions that her tendency to take on every veteran's problems as personal responsibilities was unsustainable. The Navy psychologist had been patient but firm in pointing out that Sarah's drive to save everyone was rooted in her inability to save James, and that she needed to maintain professional boundaries to avoid burning out completely. But, standing outside Maria's motel room at nearly 3 a.m, professional boundaries felt like luxuries that desperate people couldn't afford.
"Sarah, I have something in here," Maria said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Something that would make all the pain stop. I just wanted to say goodbye to someone who gave a damn about me." The statement hit Sarah like ice water. In 6 years of helping veterans, she had dealt with suicide threats before, but never from someone she had developed such a close working relationship with. Maria wasn't just another case, she had become something like a younger sister to Sarah. "Maria, I need you to put down whatever you're holding and step away from it," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain calm while her mind raced through crisis intervention protocols. "I'm going to call Dr. Martinez right now, and we're going to get you the help you need tonight." "No more doctors," Maria replied. "No more forms and appointments and people who look at me like I'm broken. I'm tired of fighting a system that doesn't want me to win." Sarah understood Maria's frustration better than most people could. The VA disability process had become a maze of requirements that seemed designed to exhaust applicants into giving up rather than to provide support for legitimate claims. Veterans with traumatic brain injuries were expected to remember and document events from deployments where they had sustained the very injuries that impaired their memory. But Sarah also understood something else that Dr. Walsh had taught her during their sessions. Her own emotional investment in veteran outcomes sometimes clouded her judgment about appropriate interventions. "Maria, I'm going to share something with you that I've never told anyone else," Sarah said, making a decision that probably violated several professional protocols. "My brother James killed himself after his last deployment." The motel room went completely silent. Sarah had never spoken those words aloud to anyone, not even to Dr. Walsh during their most intensive therapy sessions. The official story was that James had died in combat during a classified operation, and that fiction had been easier for Sarah to live with than the truth. "He came home from Afghanistan different," Sarah continued, her voice barely audible. "He tried to get help, but the mental health services were overwhelmed, and he fell through the cracks. The night he died, he called me, but I was working late and didn't answer. I found him the next morning." Sarah could hear Maria moving closer to the door, probably sitting on the floor just on the other side of the thin barrier between them. "The classified operation story was created to protect his memory and his team's reputation," Sarah went on. "But the truth is that James couldn't live with what he had seen and done, and the system failed him when he needed help the most." "Why are you telling me this?" Maria asked quietly. "Because I've spent 12 years trying to save every veteran I meet, thinking that if I could help enough people, it would somehow make up for not saving James. But Dr. Walsh helped me understand that James's death wasn't my fault, and your struggles aren't my responsibility to fix." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. "But that doesn't mean I'm going to abandon you. It means I'm going to help you find real solutions instead of just trying to make the pain go away temporarily." The motel door opened slowly, and Maria appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying but no longer holding the prescription bottle that Sarah had been worried about. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the erect posture that marked her as former military even in her worst moments. "I threw the pills down the toilet," Maria said simply. "After you started talking about your brother, I realized I didn't really want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop." Sarah stepped forward and wrapped Maria in a hug, feeling the younger woman's shoulders shake with renewed sobbing. They stood in the motel doorway for several minutes, two people who understood loss and trauma in ways that most civilians never would. "What happens now?" Maria asked when she had regained some composure. "Now we fight the VA decision properly," Sarah replied. "I've learned a lot about the appeals process in the past 6 weeks, and I have access to legal resources that weren't available to me before.
Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she had hoped never to use at this hour. Colonel Torres had given her his emergency number with instructions to call whenever a veteran's safety was at immediate risk, regardless of the time.
Colonel Torres, this is Sarah Chen.
I have a situation that requires immediate mental health intervention and legal assistance. The retired Army officer's voice was alert despite the early hour.
What do you need, Sarah?
Former Army medic, 3 tours Iraq, medical discharge, denied disability claim, acute suicidal ideation.
She needs psychiatric evaluation and a priority review of her case file. Location? Sunset Motel, East San Diego, room 247.
I'll have a crisis intervention team there in 20 minutes, Colonel Torres replied.
Dr. Martinez is on call tonight, and she specializes in combat-related trauma. Is the veteran cooperative?
Sarah looked at Maria, who nodded slowly. Yes, she's agreed to accept help.
Good.
Sarah, stay with her until the team arrives, but remember what we discussed about personal boundaries.
You're a liaison, not a therapist.
As Sarah ended the call, she realized that something fundamental had changed in how she approached veteran assistance. The official program hadn't just given her resources and authority, it had also given her colleagues who could share the emotional burden of helping people in crisis.
Who's Dr. Martinez? Maria asked.
A Navy psychiatrist who works specifically with veterans who have combat trauma, Sarah explained.
She understands what you've been through in ways that civilian doctors might not. And she can help with my disability claim? She can provide medical documentation that the VA will have to take seriously, Sarah said.
Your original treating physicians may not have understood the connection between your physical injuries and PTSD symptoms, but Dr. Martinez specializes in those relationships. While they waited for the crisis team to arrive, Sarah and Maria sat on the motel room's single chair and talked about practical steps for rebuilding Maria's stability. The emergency housing assistance could be extended for another 2 weeks, which would provide time for a proper psychiatric evaluation and treatment plan. Sarah's new position gave her access to employment counselors who specialized in placing veterans with disabilities, and she could expedite Maria's access to those services.
Sarah, can I ask you something personal?
Maria said as they saw emergency vehicles approaching in the distance.
Of course. Do you really think your brother would be proud of what you're doing? Or do you think he'd want you to have a life of your own instead of spending all your time fixing other people's problems? The question caught Sarah off guard.
She had never considered that James might have wanted her to find happiness rather than to dedicate her life to honoring his memory through service to others.
I don't know, Sarah admitted. I've never thought about it that way. James sounds like he was a good brother, Maria said. Good brothers want their sisters to be happy, not just to be useful.
Dr. Martinez turned out to be a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the kind of calm presence that immediately put distressed people at ease. She spent 40 minutes talking with Maria while Sarah waited outside, giving the two women privacy to discuss medical details and treatment options. When Dr. Martinez emerged from the motel room, her expression was professionally neutral but optimistic.
How is she? Sarah asked. Stabilized for now, Dr. Martinez replied.
She's agreed to voluntary admission for 72 hours of observation and treatment planning. Her PTSD symptoms are significant, but treatable with proper medication and therapy.
What about her disability claim?
I'll be conducting a comprehensive evaluation that should provide the medical evidence she needs for her appeal. Based on what she's described, her original discharge evaluation missed several service-connected conditions. Sarah felt relief washing over her, but also exhaustion. The intensity of the past few hours had drained her emotionally and physically. Sarah, Dr. Martinez continued, Colonel Torres asked me to remind you that you have a therapy appointment with Dr. Walsh tomorrow afternoon.
Given tonight's events, it might be especially important for you to keep that appointment.
As the crisis team prepared to transport Maria to the Naval Hospital for evaluation, Maria hugged Sarah goodbye.
Thank you for saving my life tonight, she said quietly. Thank you for letting me help, Sarah replied.
And for reminding me that my brother probably wanted me to be happy.
After the emergency vehicles left, Sarah sat in her car outside the motel for another hour, thinking about Maria's question.
James had always been protective of her, even when they were children. He had joined the military partly because he wanted to make the world safer for people he cared about, including Sarah. Maybe honoring his memory didn't require her to sacrifice her own well-being indefinitely. Maybe the real tribute to James's sacrifice would be finding a way to help veterans while also building a meaningful life for herself. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, the young veteran who had been her first case 6 months earlier.
Sarah, wanted you to know I got the job at the construction company. Starting Monday. Thanks for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself.
Messages like that reminded Sarah why her work mattered, but they also highlighted something Dr. Walsh had been trying to help her understand. Successful veteran assistance was about helping people rebuild their independence, not creating permanent dependency on her personal support. As Sarah drove home through the empty San Diego streets, she thought about the changes in her life since Admiral Thompson had intervened in her arrest. She now had official authority, institutional resources, and professional colleagues who shared her commitment to veteran welfare. But, more importantly, she was beginning to understand that sustainable assistance required taking care of herself as well as the people she was trying to help. The trident tattoo on her wrist caught the light from passing street lamps as she gripped the steering wheel. For the first time in 12 years, it felt less like a burden and more like a reminder that healing was possible, even from the deepest wounds. Tomorrow she would continue fighting for veterans like Maria who deserved better from the systems that were supposed to protect them. But tonight, she would go home, get some sleep, and take care of herself so that she could continue the fight for years to come. The balance between service and self-care was delicate, but Sarah was finally beginning to understand that both were necessary for honoring James's memory while building something sustainable from her own pain and purpose. 1 year after her arrest for impersonating a Navy SEAL, Sarah Chen stood at a podium in the Pentagon's main conference center, addressing an audience of 300 military officials, VA administrators, and civilian veteran service providers. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. The woman who had been handcuffed for allegedly falsifying military credentials was now presenting the keynote address at the National Conference on Veteran Transition Services. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, looking out at faces that represented every branch of the military and every level of veteran care bureaucracy. "A year ago, I was arrested for stolen valor because I had earned the trust of veterans without wearing a uniform myself. Today, I want to talk about why the trust gap exists and how we can bridge it." In the front row, Admiral Thompson sat with Colonel Torres and Dr. Reeves, all three wearing expressions of pride and satisfaction. The pilot program that had started with Sarah's case had expanded to include 50 civilian liaisons across 12 states, with documented success rates that exceeded traditional veteran service programs. Sarah clicked to her first slide, which showed a simple statistic: 63% of veterans report feeling disconnected from civilian support services within their first year of discharge. "This number represents more than just a bureaucratic challenge," Sarah continued. "It represents hundreds of thousands of men and women who serve their country but feel abandoned by the systems designed to help them transition back to civilian life." In the audience, Sarah spotted Maria Santos, now working as a peer counselor at the San Diego VA Medical Center. Maria's disability claim had been approved after Dr. Martinez's comprehensive evaluation, and she had used her own experience with the broken system to help other veterans navigate similar challenges. Seeing Maria healthy and employed was one of Sarah's proudest achievements from the past year. The traditional model of veteran services assumes that military personnel will naturally trust institutional authority, Sarah said, advancing to her next slide. But many veterans have learned through hard experience that institutions can fail them when they need help most. Sarah thought about the dozens of veterans she had worked with over the past year through the official liaison program. Each one had taught her something new about the complexity of military to civilian transition, and, collectively, they had helped her develop approaches that were now being implemented nationally. Effective veteran assistance requires 3 elements that are often missing from institutional programs, she continued: immediate availability, personal investment, and cultural competency. Let me explain what each of these means in practice. Sarah's presentation included case studies from her work, with identifying details changed to protect privacy. She described Marcus's journey from homelessness to stable employment, Maria's successful disability appeal, and the collaborative approach that had helped 37 veterans find permanent housing in the past year. But the most important part of her presentation focused on something that had taken her months to understand fully: the necessity of sustainable practice. "When I started helping veterans informally 3 years ago, I operated under the assumption that dedication meant being available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week," Sarah admitted. "I thought that setting boundaries or taking time for self-care was selfish when people were suffering.
She clicked to a slide showing burnout statistics among veteran service providers, including both professional counselors and informal support networks.
This approach is not only unsustainable for service providers, it's actually harmful to veterans, Sarah explained. Veterans need to learn that healthy relationships include boundaries, that asking for help doesn't require creating dependency, and that recovery is a process they ultimately control themselves. The audience was attentive, but Sarah could see some skeptical faces among the VA administrators.
Institutional bureaucracy was naturally resistant to approaches that prioritized flexibility over standardization.
I want to address the elephant in the room, Sarah said, departing from her prepared remarks. Some of you are wondering whether civilian liaisons can really be effective without formal military training or experience. Admiral Thompson smiled slightly from the front row, recognizing that Sarah was about to tackle the credibility question that had led to her arrest a year earlier. The answer is both yes and no, Sarah continued. Civilians can absolutely provide effective support to veterans, but only if they understand military culture deeply and earn trust through competent action rather than assumed authority.
Sarah rolled up her sleeve, revealing the trident tattoo that had started everything.
This tattoo represents my connection to the military community, but, more importantly, it represents a commitment that I honor through my work every day. She had decided months ago that she would no longer hide the tattoo or minimize its significance. Dr. Walsh had helped her understand that her involvement in James's final operation, even as civilian support staff, had given her legitimate insight into military culture and trauma that deserved recognition rather than concealment. Effective veteran assistance isn't about replacing military values with civilian ones, Sarah said. It's about helping veterans translate their military strengths into civilian success while addressing the specific challenges that military service can create. During the question and answer session that followed her presentation, Sarah fielded inquiries about program logistics, funding requirements, and scalability challenges. But the question that stayed with her came from a young Army veteran in the back row.
Ms. Chen, how do you prevent this work from consuming your entire identity? How do you maintain perspective when you're surrounded by so much trauma and need?
Sarah had been working on this balance for the entire past year, guided by Dr. Walsh's patient counseling and her own growing understanding of sustainable service.
That's probably the most important question you could ask, Sarah replied.
The answer is that you have to actively build a life outside of veteran services, maintain relationships with people who aren't struggling, and remember that your own mental health is a prerequisite for helping others effectively. After the conference ended, Sarah found herself in a quiet corner of the Pentagon cafeteria with Admiral Thompson, reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed since their meeting in the Camp Pendleton interrogation room.
Sarah, I have a proposition for you, Admiral Thompson said over coffee.
The Navy is considering establishing a permanent civilian liaison program as part of Special Operations Command.
We'd like you to head it up. The offer was both flattering and terrifying.
Leading a national program would multiply her impact but also multiply her responsibilities.
What would that involve? Sarah asked.
Developing training curricula, supervising liaison personnel across all special operations units, and creating partnerships between military commands and civilian veteran services, Admiral Thompson explained. It would be a significant leadership role with corresponding authority and resources.
Sarah considered the opportunity carefully.
A year ago, she would have accepted immediately, driven by her need to honor James's memory through maximum service to veterans. But her therapy work with Dr. Walsh had taught her to evaluate opportunities based on their long-term sustainability rather than just their immediate appeal.
Admiral, I'm honored by the offer, but I need to ask some questions about work-life balance and program structure. Admiral Thompson smiled. Ask away. Would this position require me to relocate? Would it involve frequent travel? Would I still have direct contact with individual veterans, or would it be purely administrative?
The position would be based in Virginia, with moderate travel requirements, Admiral Thompson replied. You would maintain direct casework in addition to administrative responsibilities, and the Navy would provide support staff to handle routine management tasks.
And personal support? Counseling services, time off, provisions for maintaining relationships outside of work?
All of that would be part of the package, Admiral Thompson confirmed.
Sarah, we've learned from watching your work over the past year.
Effective veteran assistance requires providers who are emotionally healthy and professionally supported.
That evening, Sarah called Maria Santos to discuss the job offer.
Maria had become not just a success story from Sarah's work, but also a trusted friend whose perspective she valued.
Take the job, Maria said without hesitation. Sarah, you've proven that this approach works. Now you have a chance to help thousands of veterans instead of dozens. But, what about the veterans here in San Diego? What about our established relationships and ongoing cases?
The program is bigger than just you now, Maria replied gently. There are other liaisons who can continue the work here, and you've trained local VA staff to support your methods.
Sarah realized that Maria was right.
Her reluctance to accept the promotion was partly about her fear of losing control over veteran outcomes, which was exactly the kind of thinking that Dr. Walsh had been helping her work through.
Maria, can I ask you something honestly? Do you think I'm ready for this kind of leadership role?
Sarah, a year ago, you saved my life by putting everything on the line to help me through a crisis. But, more importantly, you've learned how to help people without destroying yourself in the process. That's exactly what the military needs in a leader. The next morning, Sarah met with Dr. Walsh for what she expected might be one of their final therapy sessions.
How do you feel about the Navy's offer?
Dr. Walsh asked.
Excited and terrified, Sarah admitted.
I want to help more veterans, but I'm afraid of losing the personal connections that make this work meaningful.
What would James think about this opportunity?
Dr. Walsh asked, using a technique that had helped Sarah process difficult decisions throughout their year of work together. Sarah thought about her brother's approach to leadership during his military career. James had always emphasized that effective leaders developed other people's capabilities rather than trying to handle everything personally. James would tell me to accept the job but to structure it in a way that maintains the principles that make the work effective, Sarah said slowly. He'd want me to build a program that could help veterans sustainably for decades, not just for the few years that I could maintain an unsustainable pace.
And what would that look like?
Hiring liaisons who have personal connections to military culture, training them properly, supporting them professionally, and creating systems that prioritize veteran outcomes over bureaucratic efficiency.
Dr. Walsh smiled.
That sounds like a plan that honors both James's memory and your own well-being. 2 weeks later, Sarah accepted the Navy's offer, with conditions that reflected everything she had learned about sustainable service. She would lead the new Special Operations Civilian Liaison Program while maintaining a reduced caseload of direct veteran assistance. She would live near Washington, D.C. but spend at least 1 week per month in San Diego, maintaining connections with the veteran community that had taught her how to do this work effectively. Most importantly, she would continue her therapy work with Dr. Walsh via secure video sessions, ensuring that her own emotional health remained a priority as she took on greater responsibilities. On her last day as a regional liaison, Sarah visited the Veterans Cemetery where Danny Rodriguez was buried. Danny's memorial service had been the beginning of her involvement in military events, and his family's gratitude had sustained her through many difficult moments over the past 3 years. Standing at Danny's grave, Sarah felt a sense of completion that had been missing since James's death 12 years earlier. She had transformed her grief into service, her guilt into purpose, and her isolation into community. The trident tattoo on her wrist caught the afternoon sunlight as she placed flowers on Danny's grave. The small symbol no longer represented just her connection to James's sacrifice, it now represented her commitment to sustainable service that honored both the living and the dead. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Admiral Thompson. Sarah, your first class of liaison trainees reports for duty next Monday.
Are you ready to change how the military takes care of its people?
Sarah smiled as she typed her reply, yes, ma'am.
We're ready to get to work.
As she walked back to her car, Sarah thought about the dozens of veterans whose lives had been improved by the program she had helped create, and the hundreds more who would benefit from its expansion. The work would continue long after she was gone, sustained by principles of competent compassion and sustainable service that had been learned through trial and error, failure and success. James would be proud of what his sacrifice had inspired, but Sarah was finally learning to be proud of what she had built from her own pain and purpose. The difference was subtle but profound, the difference between trying to earn redemption and choosing to create meaning. The sun was setting over San Diego as Sarah drove home, ready to begin the next chapter of her service to the military community that had given her both devastating loss and transformative purpose.